Adam, are you mute?
I'm mute. There you go. All right, it's 7 o'clock, so let's get this thing started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Halpern, and I'm your host for tonight's Crew Classé at Home Volume 2. Who are we? My family is one of the oldest wine distributors in Canada. Founded by my late grandfather, our business is now run by my father, Todd Halpern, my uncle, Colin Halpern, and now myself, being the third generation. Tonight, we have a few special guests. Firstly, world-renowned wine critic Antonio Galloni is joining us from his home in New York City. Antonio, how are you?
Hey, Adam, super. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Antonio founded Venice Media, which is a leading website for wine reviews and ratings. This is something that our company uses religiously. If you aren't a subscriber, I suggest you do so right away. Join before tomorrow using the discount code WADE for a 30% discount. Also joining us today, we have two members from the Dwade Cellars team. Joining us today, we have Jamie Watson. Jamie has an interesting backstory. In 2004, he began dating his now wife, Cleo Pahlmayer. They moved to Napa in the summer of 2008, where Cleo joined her father, Jayson Pahlmayer, at their namesake winery. Since then, he and his wife have immersed themselves in the wine industry. In the fall of 2014, Jamie had the opportunity to meet our last guest, which turned into an official partnership with the Pahlmayers and Dwade in the summer of 2015. And last but certainly not least, Dwyane Wade. Do I need to give you an intro? Is that necessary?
You should get an intro like they do at the arena, Adam.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I was cut out for that. I'm going to say a few points before we really kick things off. Firstly, from everyone here and from my family and from our business and our company, we hope everyone is safe. It's difficult. These are difficult times, and as a community, we hope this is something that you guys can look forward to twice a week with our different guests. And once again, thank you to you three for joining us today.
Sure thing.
A few points that my team had and coming together to come up with this idea of our webinars, our Crew Classés at home. Tech can bring together everyone. It transcends borders. So we've created this virtual community where, often in day to day, we would go to restaurants with our friends and family and clients, have drinks, discuss wine, but obviously given the circumstances, we need to, find something else. And this is why we created this Crew Classé. Not only that, we're able to sharpen our skills and gain knowledge. There's two main points that I like to think about with these webinars. Number one is the ungoogleable. I've had the pleasure of drinking and discussing wine and life with Dwyane, with Jamie, Antonio, many times already. But these are conversations that not everyone is able to have, maybe relationships, maybe where you are in the world, what have you. So these are conversations that you can't find in a textbook, you can't find online. These are unique. There's no script here. There's questions that we know we want to talk about and things we want to do. We're going to hear from Q&As from everyone watching. But it is unscripted and it should be a lot of fun. The last piece before we really get into it is subjectivity. Wine is very subjective. There is nothing about wine that, my palate could taste something different than yours, and you're never wrong. If you taste light fruit and I taste dark fruit, it is what it is. So with that being said, I'm going to start a question for Dwyane. I know you know what it takes to be at the top, your peak and your prime in the NBA. How do you think you can take that into the wine world?
You guys can hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think for me, Adam, my success as an athlete hasn't come just as an individual athlete. So, I take what I learned by playing this team sport of basketball, and I take that into the wine world, and understanding that it takes a team to really accomplish, everything that we want to accomplish, the message that we would love to share and to put out for Dwade Cellars. So I rely on a lot of my team, which, you mentioned Jamie Watson, but we got a big team. Obviously, the Pahlmayer family is a great support system for us. But, I think I bring the same, mentality, right? It's hard work. It's being committed and dedicated. And it's been a great teammate along the way. So, those are things that I learned in the game of basketball, and that's the same thing that I bring into, this wine community.
That's great. And Antonio, I know, I have actually different vintages as the guy, other than what you guys are going to be trying today. Why don't you guys or Antonio, if you want to lead this off with what we're going to be drinking. You know, I want Jamie, I want to hear from you about, you know, the style and the, you know, the techniques that you guys use to create what you have created. I've had the privilege in tasting 3 vintages so far, and it seems like each vintage is getting better than the next. So it's obviously a lot of fun, and it's great to see. So Antonio, why don't you go for it?
Well, I've got 3 wines that I'm looking at, but I think that that Jamie and Dwayne should present their lineup and their concept of, I mean, I'm happy to chime in, of course, and talk about the wines, but I think the concept and the lineup and what drives it. I mean, I think that Jamie and Dwayne are much better suited to talk about the vision for the wines, but that's what I I mean, if you want me to ask the question, I mean, I'm sort of interested in like what the vision is. Obviously I'm looking at the rosé and the 2 red wines, but what's the vision for this lineup? How did you decide what wines you wanted to make? And basically, what's the inspiration for them? I think that'd be a great place to start.
Sure, maybe I'll jump in and answer that. You know, Dwayne was saying that his humility and the way he just approached that and the way he described this as a team is the exact same thing that, you know, made our family fall in love with him in the first place. I think that when this all started, and I'll maybe give a little backstory, we had a mutual contact who invited me to go down and have dinner with Dwayne down at a restaurant, a great restaurant in Santa Monica called Valentino's, great Italian place. They've got a great wine program, and they had the cellar set up, and that's where I met Dwayne for the first time. And my whole thing in going down there is, you know, as Adam said, my wife's family's made wines for 30 years at a very high level in Napa Valley, and continue to do so on the Sonoma coast. And so for us, we didn't go into this saying, gee, let's do a partnership or an endorsement with Dwayne. It was more along the lines of let's meet each other. And I think when we first met at that meeting, and I don't ever fanboy with Dwayne, but Dwayne, I don't think I've ever even told you this. You were my favorite player. So.
Oh, you never told me that.
Have I ever told you that?
No.
Yeah, you were my favorite player. I just loved the way you attacked the rim. I also loved your humility and your class and the way you carried yourself off the court. So when I met you that first time, you had that same attitude. So I knew at that point when we met that if you were going to put yourself into something, it was going to be something that you were dedicated to and committed to, and not just put your name on a label and have our reputation in the wine industry push it forward. And so, Antonio, to your point, when we started this, it started with the Cabernet. I mean, that's the king in Napa Valley. And
I'll show it, Jamie. Keep talking.
Yeah, there it is. At Dwade Cellars Instagram, sign up for the mailing list. You can buy it from Halpern too. But I think that when we started this, we initially, and this is some of the backstory, Adam, I don't even know if you knew it, at that time when we were working with Dwayne's team, there was, in the NBA, they didn't want players actively promoting alcoholic beverages. And so Dwayne really was first player and he was a first in a lot of ways. I mean, his fashion stuff that he's done off the court, he was really, you know, into and led the way on that. And he was really the first player that had a wine brand. So what we initially launched is with the Cabernet in China. And that's what Pahlmayer done for so long was Cabernet, and what Napa Valley did so well. And so once we did the initial launch in Shanghai, you know, we were over there and talking about it, and Dwayne said, well, I want to bring this back to the States. I said, hey man, you talk to the NBA about what they want to do. That's great. And yeah. So it evolved from there. And really the goal was always to make a wine that's accessible, both in the way it drinks and also to the audience that we're trying to speak to. I think, you know, Adam, this forum right here, I think speaks to it. Wine has the ability to bring people together across all different walks of life. And I think that's what we were trying to do with this from the very beginning. And so, you know, we've got the rosé, we got the 3 by Wade line, which is the rosé, the Napa Red blend. And then we're coming out, we've got we're doing a 3 by Wade Blanc, which is getting bottled next month, which is a Chenin Blanc. And that's which I'm excited about. And then we've got the flagship, which is the Cabernet Sauvignon. But really, it's about making wines that are accessible, high quality, and at a reasonable price point. So that's a long-winded answer to the question, but that's really the goal with this brand. And let him do his thing.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And you know, someone just funny enough just asked this question. This is where I was leading to next. Antoinette just asked this. What, you know, it's obviously given Dwayne your connection with China now. with Li Ning and, you know, how successful that has become. First is, why did you, obviously that's why you guys chose China. How did that all kick off? And is that, you know, what was the label? You know, tell me about China. You always tell me stories about winery.
Yeah. So obviously I signed with the Li Ning brand about 8 years ago, in 2012. And I remember at the time when I did sign with them, it was a little confusion on a lot of my fan base, or a lot of people out there probably not understanding that move for me, leaving the Nike umbrella to sign with a Chinese brand. A lot of people didn't know. But for me, it was about building something. It was about building a legacy, something bigger than me that I, you know, may have not even been able to see. And I feel like they will give me the best opportunity to do that. So, you know, fast forward to, you know, when we started our wine brand, and, you know, understanding that in the States, you know, playing in the NBA, you know, an athlete, you know, kind of sponsoring or representing a alcohol company is not something that, you know, is necessarily what the NBA roots for. So we decided to take our brand to China first. And we knew at the time that China was this emerging wine market. And, you know, I spent a lot of time in China every summer. So we was like, you know what, let's kind of launch our wine in China. And we did. You know, Jamie, we partnered with someone in China, and we was able to, you know, kind of take our wine all over China and get people to experience it. And that was our plan early on. Our plan was never to really bring it to the States until I was done playing. So this would have been our first year really bringing it to the States. But we did have a lot of people, especially in the Miami community, restaurants, friends of mine that reached out and said, hey, what about us? Like, how can we get our hands on some of this wine? And that kind of started changing the mindset of us to say, okay, well, you know, let's go down and talk to Prime 112. You know, let's go down and talk to, you know, the individuals in Miami, and let's see what, you know, what can happen. So I believe that if anybody look at this label, it's called Dwade Wade, but the script comes from, it's inspired, you know, by, you know, it's inspired by Asia, you know, and that's where it started at. So I want a lot of people to know that, like, yes, this is obviously a Napa, you know, company, but it was inspired, and you could tell by the label on this wine and the label on the Dwade Wade that it was inspired by Asia. So we're thankful for them pushing us to start this off, and we're thankful for everyone else in the States that pushed us to bring it here earlier.
Well, I think, you know, my story is quite funny, how I got to you guys. You know, it's simple. I slid into the DMs. That's basically what happened. You know, there's no sugarcoating here. You know, I heard one of my favorite basketball players of all time was beginning to make wine. I just said, well, isn't this an opportunity? So, you know, I slid in there. I believe Jamie, one of you guys from the team, obviously responded. And then I guess the first time we met was when you were playing your brief stint in Cleveland. That was obviously a fun first night with my father and you.
On my birthday.
That was your birthday, yes.
It was my birthday, yeah.
Adam, is that when you took him out to isn't that when you brought every time I see Adam in Ontario, all he does is drink Latoche. So that's probably another Latoche night.
That's hearsay.
Jamie, that was the day Adam ruined my life.
Oh.
For better. Like Antonio, Adam introduced me to French wines a little too early. I had just started, you know, filling out my palate a little bit and started getting into learning more about wines. And then, you know, Adam and Pops introduced me to French wine, some Burgundy wine very early. And I was like, well, it's over with.
That's why they call Pinot the heartbreak grape.
Yeah, I think, Dwayne, I think you called me out and said, hey, we should look at making some Burgundy. I said, get your check, brother.
So
yeah, right.
Just to, you know, move on with our conversation. I have a lot of NBA questions and how you got into wine, Dwayne, but I want to go over to Antonio. I guess we should start with the rosé, the Dwade Wade 2018 rosé. One thing I want to mention to the viewers is what Antonio thinks about the wine. Of course, it's extremely important. He's one of the best wine critics in the world. But it's so interesting how to define wine. When you smell the wine, when you taste the wine, what you get. So Antonio, when you taste the wine, maybe you could help our viewers and myself, Jamie, Dwayne, walk us through what you're thinking when you're trying this. And I guess to start, the rosé.
Well, I can just tell you my own personal approach to tasting wine, obviously, and everybody's got a different way of doing things. But I think one of the beautiful things about wine is that it should involve all of your senses. So I think there's sometimes a lot of rosé is a bit of a different example because it's a wine that you're going to drink in the first couple of years. But just generally in wine, I think a lot of times people focus on flavors and not so much on textures. And the danger is there. Adam, you were talking before at the beginning of your introduction about fruit flavors and things like that. And those are very personal because we know you don't actually taste those. What you really taste is acid and, you know, things like that. The perception of flavors really are really things that you smell, and they're really suggestions of things. They're not really there. They're just suggested. And so what I think of as a blueberry, you know, somebody else might think of as a red cherry or something. And so that's so personal. But I think what is less personal and more universal is the idea of wine as texture. How does it feel? What's the weight of the wine? So when I taste this rosé, the first thing I notice is that it has a really nice mid palate and nice weight to it. It's not that sort of bracing, super dry, super steely kind of rosé that's very popular these days. It's a rosé with weight. So I'm using my palate not to say whether it's cranberries or strawberries or white flowers, but it's about the weight of the wine. And the reason why I think that's important is that as wines evolve, so going to the red wines, which will age and bottle, flavors evolve over time. Aromas change. Wines pick up spice, tobacco, leather, the chocolate, these things. Those compounds develop in a wine, but the weight of a wine, the texture of a wine is a constant throughout its entire life. I mean, it can change a little bit, but it doesn't change like this. It just changes like a little bit. So, and that's a more useful framework, I think, for understanding how wines are over time. So if you like Burgundy or you like Barolo or you like Napa Valley Cabernet, I think it's very educational to approach wine from a textural standpoint as well. And because that is, if I say to you that this rosé has some weight, I bet 9 out of 10 people will agree with me. If I say it's like cranberry, somebody's gonna say, well, it's more like strawberry. Oh, well, it's more like, you know, because that's more subjective. But if I say this rosé, the first thing I notice about it is that it has weight. More people are going to agree with that because it's closer to a factual statement. So it's always subjective, but it's something, an anchor that people can use. And so I try in my writing, I want to speak to as many people in the world as I can. I want to touch every person in the world who has an interest in wine or wants to learn about wine. And I think a textural approach is much more universal. So that's when I taste the rosé, that's ultimately what it comes down to me is. And I'd be curious to know from Jamie and Dwayne, what gives that wine that richness in the mid palate, because it's kind of unusual relative to a style that's really popular these days.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, I think I like the approach. I think it's a universal key to be able to talk about wines in a way that everyone can talk about them. So the rosé is a direct press, intentional rosé. So it's not, we're not doing a Saunier. So there's a little more weight when I think you do it in that style. You know, I also think it's.
And Jamie, I hate to interrupt you, but maybe you could explain what those terms are.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody might know the technical stuff. I mean, we geek out on that, but what does that mean?
Yeah, no, good.
Rosé, these are grapes picked for rosé versus Saignée. What is that? What are the two main approaches to making rosé?
Yeah, so I know our CEO Matt Nauman, who's a great winemaker, is laughing at me right now because he knows this stuff better than I do. And I know you're on there, Matt, so that's a shout.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. No, but you know, Saunier is basically where you, instead of you bleed off the juice. So you're taking some of the the juice and you're bleeding it off to try to concentrate the main wine that you're making. So let's say you're making a Syrah and you want to concentrate it, you'd bleed off some of the juice and to concentrate the main wine that you're trying to make. And you could, instead of pouring that wine down the drain, you could take that Saunier, the bled off juice, and ferment that and make a rosé out of it. And so that tends to produce a less concentrated style of wine, whereas a direct press is you're intentionally taking the fruit to make a rosé wine. You're not trying to bleed it off. So instead of macerating the grapes together and trying to concentrate it, you just take the grapes directly from the vineyard and put them in the press and take the free run juice and make the rosé out of that. And I think it adds more weight and more texture to the wine as you do it. Antonio, I'll let you correct any errors that I made there, and I'm sure Matt tomorrow will correct any error.
And is this wine aged in barrel, or what's the aging for this wine?
It's stainless steel. It's stainless steel, so it's not aged in barrel. You know, part of that is the reason it's not aged in barrel is because we're trying to make this an affordable wine, and so every component that you add to the process of raising the wine obviously adds price point to it. So I mean, I think this wine goes out at $15 to our customers, and so I think it provides a good value. So it's predominantly Grenache from Paso, and also a little bit of Syrah as well.
And so Paso Robles, which is a warm appellation.
Paso Robles.
Yeah, by nature.
Which also adds to the weight of the wine.
Yeah, cool.
That's a great point. Thank you, guys. I guess one thing I wanted to go into more, because Dwayne, you and I, we just speak about this occasionally, but I don't think I've ever gone in deep with you. So MBA in wine now is awesome. It's cool. It's like one of the things. It's like NBA players TikToking right now. That's like the thing. So I'm just thinking about it, and this Matthew asked this question: who were the guys that really got you in originally? And what was the tipping point? Was it a certain bottle that you had, before we drank, of course, but was it a certain bottle? Was it a certain experience? And then, just tell me about your story getting into wine and then saying, well, let's make a wine.
Well, just to give a little deeper background, because of the way that I grew up, I really didn't indulge into any alcohol or anything of that matter until I felt I was old enough and mature enough to handle it. So my first drink of wine was at 27 years old, and I had veteran guys on my team, and Alonzo Mourning. I always talk about this moment where Alonzo Mourning gave me my first bottle of wine, and I had no idea. I mean, think about it. I'm coming from drinking sugar down Kool-Aid and any juice that I can get my hands on, and you give me a bottle of wine. Now that's that's totally different two different sides of the spectrum. So my first bottle that I ever tried was he gave me a bottle of Flowers, and flower wine was his favorite wine, and he gave me a bottle, and I hated it. I thought it was the worst thing I've ever tasted in my life. And it's just me being a younger guy and not really knowing anything about wine or never really tasting wine. So from there, I think what I started to do is I started to try something closer to my palate at the time, which was sweeter. So I started tasting kind of Riesling wine, right? Like sweeter Riesling wine. And that's kind of where I lived for a while until I just continued to keep trying different things. So really, I want to say Alonzo introduced me to wine, but from there, I never thought, hey, I want to be in the wine business. It really was something, and we talk about this all the time when we go out and speak about our wine. It really was something that happened when I really met the Pahlmayer family. Before that, we were having conversations about, hey, what this could be like, but I didn't know if I really wanted to do it until I went down to, after the dinner with Jamie, I went down to Napa Valley and got a chance to sit down with, the entire family and really get a chance to meet Jayson Pahlmayer, AKA Jayson. And I fell in love with the Pahlmayer family, and I felt in love with, what we could do together. And, it just started from there, right? It started from, me and the Pahlmayer family kind of collaborating on a wine, and just kind of like a passion project for both of us, summer fun. And now it's turned into Dwade Cellars, which, is a business that's very small, but still growing. So it just kind of happened organically for me, Adam. It wasn't something that I knew that I would ever get into or ever think that I wanted to. But, as I got older, I knew the conversations I wanted to have. I knew the rooms I wanted to go in, and I seen that those rooms had wine involved in them. And I was like, well, I need to learn, how to be able to at least drink one glass of wine without making that bitter face, all the time. And that's kind of how it started. Very, very organically and very easy and simple.
And was there a wine drinking culture when you were with the Heat? Is it from Udonis or
No. It was a different drinking culture back then. It was a harder liquor drinking culture. So, I like to say that, your veterans, when you come into the NBA, your veterans really shape how you think and the way you move. So, you know, I like to give credit a lot to, and I'm sure it was other guys before us, and I'm not saying we started it, but in this new generation, I like to give credit to my friends, you know, LeBron, Carmelo, and Chris Paul, and myself for kind of, you know, talking about wine, you know, kind of exposing, I think, the next generation to the coolness of wine, right? And now it's really a cool thing in the NBA. It's really a conversation that goes on and happens, you know, all the time. And guys are really getting into it and really trying to learn a lot about it. And you guys know, learning about wine is one of the hardest things you will ever do. As I watched Uncorked last night, understanding that it is definitely one of the hardest things you ever learn, but it's definitely now the wave in the NBA.
And were you concerned when you decided that you wanted to have your wine brand and Jamie pitched you on it? A lot of celebrities nowadays have their names on brands, whether it's wine, tequila, vodka, you name it. Some people just try and give it a shot. What were your thoughts and concerns going into it?
Well, I can't say. I think early on when I sat down and I was thinking about like what to name, my first wine, and I said, and I asked Jayson Pahlmayer, I said, "How did you come up with your name?" He was like, "What, Pahlmayer or Jayson?" Because that is my name. He was like, "I think your name should be on this wine." So when we set out to put Wade on the bottle of this first wine, which was, as I said, which was a Cabernet, I started to be a little concerned, as more people was exposed to our wine, because one, it's a perception that comes with, an athlete or quote unquote celebrity, if that's what I am, putting their name on things, and especially wine, because it wasn't something that I ever grew up saying, "Hey, I want to do this." So it just kind of came out of nowhere. So as a wine group, we actually talked a few times about changing the name of the brand, because I didn't want people to be either turned off because my name was on it, or whatever the case may be. So definitely have some concerns about, more so than anything, is the name, on the wine, because I want the juice in the bottle to speak for itself. And this is some amazing juice. And, I give a lot of credit to, the Pahlmayer family. I give a lot of credit to John Keys, my winemaker, as well, on really taking their time and making sure that, every ounce of juice that goes into these bottles is grade A. So, but definitely concerned.
And I know this question actually is for everyone here, but I'll obviously start with you, Dwyane. We know what the legacy you left with the NBA. Don't need to chat about that. We're all aware of it. But in terms of growing, let alone other business ventures, but your wine business, obviously the idea of legacy is so important. So you believe that wine can be one of those, pieces to add outside of basketball that will do that?
I think it's a possibility. I didn't, honestly, I didn't get into it really because of that. I can't say I had that long-term thought in my mind that, oh my God, one day I would love to, to be a Hall of Fame in the wine industry, like I hope to be in the basketball. I think for me, I try to keep it real simple. When I talk to people about wine, whenever I drink wine, I keep my mind simple on it. I try not to complicate it, because, like I said, it's so much to learn. So even in the Wade brand, what we try to bring is, we try to bring an excitement, we try to bring a fun, we try to bring a different way of thinking or doing things. And when I talk to people about wine, I never talk to them as someone who feels like, oh, I know so much and I'm above you on where you are in your wine, so let me sound smart. I kind of talk to them like, just a person who picked up a glass and just loves the taste and loves the way that it makes me feel. I'm a lot friendlier when I drink wine. I laugh more when I drink wine. So I kind of talk to it from that standpoint, more so than, the oak, or, where the wine, what the vintage is from, what the varieties, or anything like that.
And Antonio,
I just wanted to build on that.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Because I think one of the most beautiful things about wine is that it can be a lifelong passion. There's not too many things that can accompany you basically your whole life, because there is always something more to learn. There is always a region that you haven't tasted as much of. There are places to travel. There is a new vintage every year, whether you want to necessarily get into that detail or not, but there's just so much out there. You're never going to get tired of exploring the world of wine. There's new wineries all the time. There's places that are making great wine that couldn't make great wine 10 or 15 years ago because of climate change. You have the rediscovery of all sorts of native grapes in places like Italy and other parts of Southern Europe. Of course, you've got Napa Valley in California. Dwyane mentioned flowers. That's Sonoma Coast. That's a region that's really just where there's a lot of incredible wines now, much better than many and more great wines than there were 10 or 12 or 15 years ago. And of course, that's what we try to do at Venice. You know, our main mission is education. It's all about that. It's about education, community, of course, independence, which we have to have. Editorial independence is really fundamental, but that's what we're all about, is education, and doing that, and like Dwyane said, in a way that's not, hey, you know, I've tasted a gazillion wines and you haven't, but saying, you know, I like this wine because it makes me feel X, Y, and Z. I mean, obviously our description's a little bit more technical than that, but the end objective is to get people really excited about what is in that glass, because it's pretty magical. You know, as I said on the podcast we had the other day with Guillaume d'Angeville, we live in a world that's increasingly standardized. Everybody's got the same phone. You can drink the same Starbucks coffee when they're open, you know, all over the world. Cars, a lot of things, computers, everybody's got the same MacBook. I mean, it's all super standardized, and wine is one of those few things left in the world that is still made by people and nature. And ultimately, that is, to me, what I love the most about this beverage, but it will provide you with a lifelong opportunity to learn. And I'm like, in the morning, I'm just as engaged like every day as I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So.
And how do you, Antonio, how do you look at legacy? Because you've excelled at the top of your field.
Oh, I don't know. That's kind of a big thing to say, but I like to think of myself as still really young. I don't know.
Ready for the Hall of Fame speech yet?
No, I don't think so. I think my goal professionally, I mean, I have two basic goals that drive my life. The first one is personal, and that is to make a difference in the lives of other people, because there's plenty of other people who are less fortunate. We're unfortunately seeing that right now. But that's, if you ask me, what are my goals as a person, as a human being, that's my number one goal, to make a difference in the lives of people who are less fortunate. And in wine, my number one objective is I do want to leave something of lasting value. So wine reviewing is a wonderful job, but it's also very temporal, meaning there's, in the passage of time, might decay some of your contributions. Like these wines, we'll drink them, all write about them, and they have a life, you know, hopefully they have a long life, but they have a life. One of the things that I want to do is create things that last forever. That's why I'm deeply involved with the project to map the vineyards of the United States, for example. You know, we've done Napa Valley, we're working on Sonoma, Santa Lucia Highlands, and other regions, because I want to create with my team, because just like Dwyane said, you know, you're not going to get anywhere in this world by yourself, and maybe individual sports, but those guys and gals have really big teams too. They're just not on the court. Yep. You're not going to get anywhere by yourself. So the team concept is super critical to what we do at Venice. And with my team, we are in this project to map all of the vineyards of the United States, because I want, one day, we want people to value the great vineyards of, you know, I see, you know, the Wade Cabernets from Oakville. We want people to rever those sites just as much as they do. We were talking before about Burgundy, Vosne Romanée, Gevrey Chambertin, Moray Saint Denis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would be thrilled if one day somebody would say that I have a legacy, but I'm working really hard to build that. But it's all about creating things of lasting value. Maybe it's education. Maybe somebody leaves this webinar with one little kernel of knowledge that will serve them for the rest of their lives. I would be thrilled. Maybe it's our maps. Maybe it's some article that I wrote that, you know, turned somebody onto some wine. But that is really a big part of what we're trying to do as a company and what I want to achieve as a person. I want to inspire people. You know, this thing that's happening in basketball, but it's symptomatic of culture, which is wine is becoming much more socially acceptable. And I think that that's wonderful. And because this is a lifestyle enhancing product, in, you know, responsibly, of course, but it can change the quality of your life quite meaningfully. And these wines all are from a place. They have a culture, they have a story, that people who made them, the year, the grape, all that stuff makes this wine different from the wine I tasted, you know, yesterday and the wine I'm going to taste tomorrow. So yeah, I'd be delighted if when I have some gray hair, somebody will say that we have a legacy, but I am still working on it.
You're quite
I
humble.
still think of myself as being really young.
So I'm gonna hop back to you, Dwayne, and then Jamie, I have a good one for you. For Dwayne, I actually do believe, and I want to know your thoughts on this. Do you think your label is helping to introduce new and young people to the world of wine? Because in my opinion, I 100% believe so. You know, when you came to Toronto for a couple visits with us, it's clear the you know, how many people enjoyed you being there, but enjoyed talking with you about wine, hearing about your wine. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, and whoever asked that question, I mean, I hope so. You know, I think when we sit down as a team and we talk about the next steps for, you know, Dwade Cellars. My main message to the team is, hey guys, I'm definitely going to try to continue to learn and be educated by the people I'm around and the places I get to go, but I don't want to be a som. You know, I don't want to go to that place. I don't want the Wade wine business to be looked at as that. I want it to be looked at as, you know, as exciting, as fun, as new, as someone who just enjoys wine and just want to pick up and drink our wine just because they like it, not because they need to have so much knowledge on exactly what all goes into the wine process. So, you know, I definitely think I get a lot of feedback from people about our wine labels, you know, especially the 3 by Wade label. And it's cool. So we've always trying to figure out a way to, on the next wine, of trying to, how can we recreate, you know, that label and keep it cool but change it a little bit and keep it, you know, if you look at each label, this one right here, right, is not as fun as this one, but it's, I don't know if you can see it, but it's the same label. It's just not as fun as this one. So we always trying to switch it up and see what we can put behind the 3 by Wade and how can we make it cool. And because what I do know is I know people that goes to their local retailers and buy wine, and they buy for the label, right? They buy it obviously for the cost as well, but they also buy it for the label. Sometimes, you know, you may not know, you know, what wine is, but you know you like it, and you pick up this label and you be like, this is a nice looking label. I'm going to buy this. So, you know, that's something that we definitely have had in mind, and we try to make sure that we continue, you know, to produce.
Okay, well, thank you. And Jamie, back to you here. Let's talk about the 3 by Wade blend. So obviously how many vintages of 3 by Wade? There's been 3 vintages.
So we did, yeah, it was, well, yeah, 3 vintages. So I think what you're coming to you soon, Adam, is the 16, and I think Antonio and 16 3 by Wade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think our goal with this wine was to make, the thing about Napa, and Antonio's written about this extensively, is, and we'll see where it all goes now with the new stuff going on, but the price creep that's taken place in Napa over the years to come out with a new wine, a new Cabernet. I remember when Pahlmayer was $105 a bottle, and I was, gee, that's expensive wine. But now, you know, that's $100 a bottle is nothing in Napa. It's $300, $400 a bottle. But I still think long before, and the goal with this wine, long before Cabernet existed in Napa, you had Zinfandel, you had Syrah, you had Petit Syrah, you had, you know, what guys like Tegan Passalacqua over at Turley, or Morgan Peterson over at Bedrock, and his dad Joel did with the field blends. That was really what we were trying to do with this wine, and make a wine that was kind of a throwback that doesn't exist in Napa anymore in a lot of places. And, you know, this is a blend of Zin, Syrah, Petit Syrah, a little Malbec, Merlot. So it's a rich, approachable wine that it's just designed to be delicious. And for $35 a bottle, I think it speaks to a different time in Napa. And, you know, we source these grapes from parts of Napa that aren't as well known as Oakville or Rutherford. This comes from, you know, Eastern Appalachian in Napa, on the other side of the Vaca Range, out in Childs Valley, Pope Valley, where I still think there's value to be found in Napa. And so that was really the goal with this wine, is to I think make something that's delicious and affordable at the same time.
And there's a question that was asked by Charmine. I thought this would be a good segue for you, Jamie. Wine is a global product. What trends do you see coming from the new worlds that are impressing you and making you wanting to leverage in your winemaking techniques? Examples like biodynamic and organic.
Wow, that's a can of worms right there. I'd be interested to hear Antonio's response to that as well. I mean, for us living here in Napa, I'm sitting right in my office looking down First Street in Napa, and it's like a dead zone. But in Napa, we're so, I think, insular a lot of times. We think about Napa, we think about the immediate regions. I think that one thing that's been really helpful to us personally is, and this is another shout out to Matt Nauman, our CEO of Wade Cellars, is he brings that type of perspective to it. Is to answer a question, brings that type of perspective of what's going on in newer regions, what's going on with the farming, what's going on in lesser known regions around the world. And I think that bringing that type of culture is important to whatever we're doing in the wine brand. So I think we definitely try to look at it, as far as biodynamic and organic. I mean, for example, our Chenin Blanc was coming out, that's an organic vineyard. And I think that's important to us. I think anytime you're farming or buying or using product from the land, doing it in a sustainable way and doing it in a way that is the least impactful on the environment is something that really matters to us. And I think should matter to all wine producers around the world. So you could spend an hour on that question, but that's kind of some of the perspective I think of.
And Antonio, because you so extensively look at Napa Valley, what do you really see that the old world is bringing to the new world? What techniques? What do you see?
Oh, I don't know. I think it might be the other way around. I when I go to Bordeaux, which is another region that I spend a lot of time in, one of the questions I get asked the most often is what is hot in the United States and in Napa Valley, because so there's two different worlds of wine here. There's the $35 wine, which is important because you have to have consumption, and not everybody can afford higher priced wines. And so I think it's really important that there are wines that, because the question is, to me, the wine business up until pretty recently was driven by the baby boomer generation. So these are people who are now retired, who were the original customers of brands like Pahlmayer. And we hear from these people all the time, like, I'm drinking less, I'm selling my cellar, et cetera, et cetera. You have to get 30-year-olds to drink wine if you have any hope of having a business for the next 30 years. You can't depend on 65-year-old people. Nothing against that generation, but there's just not a mass of customers there anymore spending money on wine. They already have cellars, or they're drinking less, or they're giving it to their kids, or they're selling it into the auction market. You have to think about, how do I get a 25, a 30-year-old younger adult interested in wine? And so wines like this are vitally important. And then moving into the next category, the upper category, I think that what Napa Valley has to do is you guys have already done this, but these brands have to be global, because there is not enough. There's been a proliferation of high quality wines. Farming is better than it's ever been, whether you want to call it organic or biodynamic. Those are formal designations, but there's a lot of people who farm sustainably who either don't want to be labeled as something, or want to have the flexibility in a difficult year to do an extra treatment or two that would maybe take them out of that formal classification. But in general, there's a trend towards sustainability, whether it's legally defined as one of these other classifications. There's a proliferation of high-end wine brands, and fruit costs are very high for Napa Valley. And there's just not enough people probably in the United States to drink all these wines, especially because why do French, the Rotorua Group, they just announced that they bought Diamond Creek. The former Rajo estate, now called Islay Vineyard, that's owned by Artemis, which owns Chateau Latour. Why do European conglomerate winery brands love Napa Valley? It's because you don't get too many bad vintages. It's an incredible environment for making high quality wine almost every year. So as you have more production, the wines are good, they're expensive. You need to find other markets to take that wine. It can't all be had here. That's why high-end brands now in Napa Valley are selling through the Bordeaux negociants, whether it's Verite, it's Dalla Valle, it's Promontory, because that opens entire new markets. So for the higher end segment of the market, you have to think outside of just the United States. You have to think about how you create and have wine for scale and to be global, which may or may not necessarily be the ambition here. But if you say to me, what does Napa Valley have to do at the upper echelon? It's, you got to attract a broader range of customers. And one of the things I love doing is tasting California wines next to old world wines for people who say, oh, I don't drink California wine. I don't like California wine. And then I love like pouring, a bottle of Colgan or Abreu or something. And then people are like, wow, that's from Napa Valley. Yeah, that's from Napa Valley. And so I think there's maybe some prejudice in the old world against some of these wines, but it's changing dramatically. And that's what I'm kind of a mutt from lots of different places, but I still think of myself as American, and I want to see American wines because I don't think of wine ever competitively, but I want to see American wines viewed as on the same level as Chateau Latour, DRC, Rousseau, Angelus, or Cheval Blanc, or Ozone, or whatever you want. That's my dream, to see these wines viewed with that same fervor, so that 20 years from now, the way somebody poured, like where your dad poured DRC for Dwayne to ruin his bank account on Burgundy, maybe you'll pour Napa Valley wine for his kids and say, this is the standard of greatness in the world. That's kind of my dream.
I know, Dwayne, I know your kids are young, but have you exposed them to wine yet? Even smelling?
I drink a lot of wine in front of them, so that's only, But I mean, my oldest son is 18 years old, and
he's never had a glass. So good.
No, he's had a glass. He's had a glass.
Okay.
We on Thanksgiving we've had a glass together. We shared a little Wade wine together. But what I also wanted to say is, just being, I guess, with my ear to quote unquote the streets. I think the old world, and I think the wine industry, which is looked at as obviously so traditional, also was looked at as a little uppity or bougie in a sense, and I think it turned a lot of people away from jumping into the wine world, or wanting to really like where it is now because of the perception of wine and not feeling accepted. And I think that's one of the things that in our brand, and I'm sure other brands as well, that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to change that perception in the new world of everyone being accepted, and not just from a price point, but also just by the way we interact or the way we talk. And so that's definitely been a goal of ours.
And who are the freak is a bad word, but who are the wine nerds, the wine freaks that we don't hear about? Obviously, I was watching you and Mello on Instagram the other day. We saw you started to do some wine talks. Who are the other wine nerds and freaks in the NBA that we don't know about?
I mean, I think it's probably way more. So from just off the top of my head, Kuzma. We talk about wine a lot. We hit each other about wine a lot. Devin Booker is really into wine. D'Angelo Russell as well. They're best friends. They're really into wine. CJ McCullough is really into wine. It's like CJ will send me wine to try out and see, if his palate is on point. We're like, do you think this is good wine? So we kind of do that back and forth. So it's definitely a lot of guys, that I probably don't even know of, that's heavily into it outside of my friends, of just the new world in the NBA, the next generation in the NBA that are really, getting into it. And they're spending different kind of money. They're spending money on good wine,
He had Jimmy Butler the other day on his podcast. Said he with Carmelo, Carmelo asked him, what's your day-to-day wine? He said, Sassicaia. And he goes, come on, man. He goes, no, seriously, I have 510 Sassicaia.
No, that's real. So Jimmy is very good friends with Mark Wahlberg. And Mark has, you guys know Mark is heavily into wine. And he introduced Jimmy to the wine world, but he introduced him obviously at a different level. And Jimmy has not come down from that level. But some of my best experiences and funnest memories, that we've had as NBA players have been around wine, and how we've all, have jumped into just the funness of it, and, the newness as well, of wine, because we didn't grow up knowing anything about wine. And, now it's something that's new to all of us. So newness is fun and exciting. So, I've had some amazing dinners with Jimmy and with wine. I'm telling you that we can write a movie out of the dinners we've had just by drinking 10, 20 bottles of wine in one city.
That's great. And Antonio, you know, we're talking about having fun with wine and such. What are some of your life-changing wine moments? Or how about this? I know a few of my own, but what about your life-changing wine bottles that you've had, or wine experience that you've had? Because, you know, I have a couple, but you are a lot more, not little knowledgeable. You have a lot more experience than I do in this, and I'm sure you've had a million more bottles and tried more than me. So what are they? What are those?
Let me write these down.
Oh, well, you know, I mean, ultimately, I think wine comes down to the people and the moments that you have them with. Yeah. So sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you a couple that were really special. One was the first great California wine that I tasted was BV George de Latour, not young, but older, from the 70s. And that's when I understood how Cabernet can age, because at the time it would have been about 30 years old, and I had never tasted an older wine. So that was my first introduction to how Napa Cabernet Sauvignon can age. And so I love that wine for its classicism. I mean, today's wines are a little bit different, but back then that wine it's an iconic wine. It was great vintage, and I just loved it. But I'll tell you a funny story about some other wines. One was when I just started Venice at the very beginning, I had a tasting at DRC, and it was just me and Aubert de Vilaine, which is very rare because they almost always try to group people there, and you're almost never one-on-one with Aubert, and you're at DRC. And as I think a lot of people watching this will know, if you're so lucky to taste these wines at the Domaine, you're not allowed to spit the Romane Conti, which is the last one that they serve. Yeah.
Even with all the sulfites.
Yeah, it's like a faux pas. Like, you can spit the other wines, but when you get to the RC, you're not allowed to spit. He always finds a very gentle way to remind you of this. Not that you need to be reminded, but after more than once. But, you know, he always tells you. So when I had just started Venice, it was a time of a lot of change in my life. I had just left working for Robert Parker. Everything was very, you know, I was kind of a little, he probably sensed that it was a big, like, inflection point in my life. And I probably looked that way and acted that way. Anyway, we get to the Romane Conti, and he pours me this big glass of RC. And so I taste it. Well, let me tell you the story. So I taste it, and I write my note, and I do what I always do. I taste it, I write my note, then I go back and I make sure, you know, but I'm looking at this glass and I can't help thinking, like, what it's worth. You know, and so I try not to drink too much of it, you know, and I'm ready to put it back in the glass, in the barrel, which is what you do in Burgundy. You put the wine that you haven't tasted back in the barrel. And he says, no, drink it. He goes, it's good for you. So I drank the whole glass of Romane Conti at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so this was vintage 2014 or 15, I don't remember exactly. And so I might never taste that wine again, or maybe in 20 years, because I certainly can't afford it. And it wasn't a wine in a bottle, and it wasn't in a fancy restaurant, but it was about that moment, being with somebody who's iconic for this business, one-on-one, which doesn't happen anymore. And, you know, having a toast to our mutual good health and just swigging a glass of Romane Conti. That's one of my most memorable wines. But, you know, it's because of the moment. I mean, of course, the wine was great, but it wasn't about that. It was about a moment and about him encouraging me to start my own business and us having a toast over this glass of wine. So it's really about the moment, the time, the place, the people. And yeah, the wine was great, but I'll always remember that moment with him because, you know, those things are fleeting.
I really second that. And I think one thing that really pops out for the viewers that were on on Saturday's webinar is Guillaume made a great point. And Guillaume says, how is Guillaume going to remember the 2017s? And he's going to remember the 2017s from tasting with us on his first webinar. You know, Guillaume is lined up to do webinars for the next couple months as we're all in, you know, basically isolating and you know, staying to our own homes. So for me, that's a great point you made, Antonio, that the idea of wine, you know, wine can be so great, and wine across the board can be unbelievable. You can have 1,000 of your favorite wines you've ever had, but the moments are what really pushes that. That's what the breaking point really is. Yeah, that's great. And Jamie and Dwayne, I'll go to Jamie here. Jamie, what are some of the moments and best, you know, wine moments you have?
I'll never forget the first time I ever tried what I thought was a fantastic wine, and it was, I just started dating Cleo. I was living in Sacramento at the time, and she invited me to come to Napa, and I didn't know anything about Napa. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Whidbey Island, and in the Seattle area at that time was all about micro brews and tasting. That was kind of the deal in the Pacific Northwest. So I didn't know anything about wine. And I remember I showed up at Jason's house, and he used to have a beautiful house up on Atlas Peak overlooking the whole valley. And he said, "Would you like to try a glass of my Chardonnay?" And stupidly, I said, "No, I'd actually prefer beer." And I immediately would like punch myself in the face and said, "No, I'm trying to impress his daughter. Yes, I'll have a glass of the Chardonnay." And I'll never, and that was the wine that, one, to your point, Antonio, and yours as well, Adam, being there with Cleo, falling in love with her at the time and tasting that Chardonnay for the first time when it's so rich. And, Pahlmayer Chardonnay at that time especially was, 04, 05 was just the height of Napa Chardonnay, this rich, unctuous texture. I remember taking that first sip and I went, I was, holy shit, this is good. And I was thinking to myself, this is it. I could never drink. And I remember since that time, like Antonio, I mean, I'm so lucky to, Adam, like your Grand Cru Festival, the amount of wine that you open up at that thing and
Oh man,
those types of wines.
We'll mention that to Dwayne. We'll let him experience
it. Yeah. But to Antonio's point, it's more about the moment, and I can think of other great bottles. I mean, I remember with, 85 Saint Henri that was fabulous over a dinner with some friends and like things like that. But that first one was really special for me.
That's awesome. So I want to jump to the last wine we're trying, which is the Dwade Napa Cabernet Sauvignon. And Jamie and Antonio, you guys want to, or Jamie, want to first jump into it?
Sure. Yeah. So pour myself a little bit here. So as Antonio mentioned, this is labeled Oakville, so you probably can't see it too well on there with the white label. But so the Wade Cabernet Sauvignon, it really, Napa's known for. I mean, Cabernet is king, and as Antonio said, we're very, very fortunate in Napa to very rarely have an off vintage. Unfortunately, 2017 was a bit of a weird one, and so 2017 it was marked by a lot of heat spikes, but then really it was the fires that took place in Napa that really changed the course of the whole vintage. And so, we were fortunate to get this wine off the vine one day before the fires had started. And, I feel pretty fortunate, but I think the unfortunate part is the way that we made the wine and all of that was all marred by the inability to get in and out of the cellar and things like that. But I'm pretty happy with the way this wine came out. But the Wade Cabernet Sauvignon is really our flagship. And as Antonio said, Oakville is kind of the tenderloin, as his mentor always said, is the tenderloin in Napa Valley. And I always liked the way Bob would write about wines and the way he described it like a cut of meat. But really, in Napa Valley, Oakville is the center cut. And so we're really fortunate to work with Oscar Renteria and his family that farms a vineyard right there off of Skellinger Lane, right on the east side of Oakville. And so we only make 125 cases of this wine. So we buy the fruit from Oscar. It's 100% Cabernet Sauvignon from Oakville, about 75% new oak. And for Napa, I think still an affordable price point. I don't know what it is Canadian, Adam, but $95, sub $100 for 100% Cabernet Sauvignon from Oakville, shockingly still represents value in Napa.
Our dollar up here is quite weak right now, so it's a little.
We won't talk about
yeah. And Antonio, what do you think? And Dwayne, I'm going to jump to you in a second, so be ready.
Well, I think you judge. I don't like that word, I guess, but for lack of a better word, the best way to get an idea of a winery is not to taste the great vintage, but to taste a more difficult vintage. Because you asked, I think, Guillaume d'Angerville the other day or your dad about favorite wines, and your dad said 2010. But in Burgundy in 2010, the wine has to be great. It can't not be great. If it's not great, there's a problem. That's an epic vintage. Like Clos de Duc, It has to be great. And you could say the same thing in Napa Valley about years like 16 or 18 probably. But 17 is a difficult vintage because you have the heat spikes and then you have this inability, even if you got your fruit off the vine before the fire, as Jamie's saying, a lot of places were blocked. You couldn't get in, you couldn't do stuff. And so I think that you really can tell the level of a wine and an estate and a winery in the less favorable years. And so when I taste this wine, it's, got really nice aromatics, red fruit, very typical of that vintage, medium bodied structure. So 17s are lighter style of wine for Napa Valley, because basically what happens is when you have excessive heat, not to get too technical here, but when you have too much heat, we talked about learning. So you think you would think that when it gets very hot, the wines become really, really rich. And that's true up to a certain point. But if it gets too hot, then the vines, they shut down, they undergo what is called the heat stress. They become blocked, the ripening stops. And so it's counterintuitive, but in some years where it's very hot, you might actually end up with wines that are slightly lighter. And this was a year, again, I hate to get too technical, but this was a year where something very strange happened in Napa Valley, which is that the brix, which is the level of ripeness, I don't know if this is true of this wine, Jamie, of course, will know, but in a lot of places, the brix, the level of ripeness right before harvest, it went down, which is things that people say, I've never seen that before.
We saw that in this wine.
Yeah. Winemakers will tell you, I've never seen that. And when you talk to somebody who's made 20 or 30 years vintages and they say, I've never seen this happen, you understand how unusual it is. So what's interesting here is you have that oakville richness, but you don't have that bombasticness that sometimes make wines too intense. So I actually have always liked the best wines of 2017. You have to be selective, of course. It's very inconsistent, but I like this wine for its aromatics, its mid-weight structure, it's bright, it's focused, it's clean. There's no awkward anything. And I found it a really nice surprise, to be honest.
That's great.
Like your first review, Dwayne.
Yeah, that's big. That's big.
It's not really a review. It's just my.
I'm not putting you on the spot, Antonio.
I'm just saying my first impression. Well, it's my first impression, but look, I said before, Venice is about learning, but what I like to do is I like to learn from other people and then distill that. So one of the best tastings I ever had was in Burgundy with La Louise Leroy, who's like the queen of Burgundy. And she said to me at one point, so she makes maybe 20 wines. She opened every bottle. So these, again, I don't know what the value was of that tasting, but we're talking healthy six figures. She opens 20 Pinot Noirs, Burgundies, for me to taste. It's just me and her. And at one point, she says to me, she goes, am I going too fast? So she's like 80, dressed in Chanel, the two dogs. She's like, am I going too fast? And I'm like, no, but that I knew that because I had tasted with her before. But she talks to me like I'm like her grandkid, like kind of. She says, am I going too fast for you, son? Kind of like that. And I'm like, no, it's okay. And she goes, I like to taste fast. I'm like, I know. And she said, she goes, when you're tasting, you have to trust your first impression. It's when you don't trust your first impression, that's when you make a mistake. And she said to me, tasting a wine, it's either yes or no. That's it. She says, there is no middle ground. She goes, it's just like people. Like, I remember that conversation like years later, like every word. So I go a lot on the first impression, but that's not something that I can tell you that's my grand idea. It's something that I learned from somebody else. So as much as I like to say, sure, we have this website and it's about education, for me personally, I love sucking in the knowledge from all of these great people that I have a chance to meet, and then maybe sharing that, like on this forum, in this webinar. So she always says, trust your first impression. So no, it's not a review, but it's my first impression.
I like your first impression.
And I guess in terms of, Dwayne, I was going to ask you this, but I feel like you drink your wine paired with cereal. If that's how much I know you love it. And you always tell me how much you love it. So I don't think there's a bad pairing for you here. But Jamie, as the on the winemaking side, what are, some of our viewers that, whether they have some Napa Cab or the blend or the 3 by Wade blend or the 3 by Wade Rosé, what do you suggest pairing those with? Do you have anything off the top of your head that you've had?
Yeah, the rosé, I think, is I just love rosé as a lunch wine. Anything light, pasta, shrimp scampi, things like that. I mean, for me, the classic pairing in Napa is red meat. I mean, I don't think, one of the best restaurants here in Napa, I love it, is Press Restaurant. And I don't know, Antonio's been there a number of times, but it's hard to argue with a Napa Cabernet and a nice cut of steak from factory beef in particular. It's something so synergistic to me. That's a personal preference. Antonio, I don't know what you like to drink with Napa Cab, but that for me is like tip top.
It is, but this wine has a structure and a medium-bodied structure and really nice perfume that I could see it also going really well with like salmon or tuna or even chicken, and I think it's really important. There's a question about trends in the wine world. I think, food-wise, as a global population, there's definitely a move towards eating a healthier diet, more Mediterranean diet. This is true, especially as people get older, and these wines, especially higher end wines, will appeal to older people who can afford them. And I just think it's really important for wines to be great at the table, because we're all paying more attention to what we eat these days. And there's much more focus on ingredients than there was, let's say 20 years ago, where they're from. You go to restaurants, they'll tell you where the vegetables are from or where the meats are from or where the fish is. And so I think it's really important that these wines be drinkable. And some of the wines in the 90s, you mentioned also like, this 04, 05 kind of era, they're just hard to drink with almost anything. They were like the meal. And, what you want is, you don't want people to drink one bottle of your wine. You want them to drink the second bottle. And right now restaurants are obviously in a very difficult position, but within the realm of responsibility, it's not the first bottle that you want them to drink, it's the second bottle. And that's going to happen only if there's pleasure and that wine is not so overwhelming that you can't taste anything else. So, but I would drink the 17 with, you could drink it with a lot of things because again, of that combination of freshness and energy that it has. I think it would be delicious with just about anything.
Adam, let me share something with you guys of kind of how, I drink wine is, honestly, wine is when I'm going out to dinner or, anything, my wine is an appetizer and really a dessert for me. I don't drink a lot of wine while eating a lot of times. Maybe because I'm trying to get to the food real fast. But I think also for me is letting people know as well is that, you don't have to, when you sit down and eat, you don't have to order wine to go to the exact meal. It's just about enjoying the wine. So a lot of times for me, I enjoy the wine before I eat, and I really enjoy it after I'm done eating. And one thing I do love to do for all the people who love to go to restaurants is, even though I have friends in the wine industry, even though I can contact Jamie and now Antonio, definitely, and Adam, I like to talk to the soms. I like to talk to the sommeliers at every restaurant I go to. And I really love to get their recommendation of, different wines, because one, introduced me to wines that, I never would have thought to drink, because we all like to stay, in the realm of what we know. So I like to be introduced to wines I never thought that, I would drink or didn't know anything about. And also too, like going back to what I'm eating, the som's able to help me with what I'm eating as well. Like, hey, these wines go great with this. What do you think about ordering? I know, in the wine world, a lot of myths out there about wine. And I don't really jump into them. I just really enjoy wine, no matter if I'm eating, no matter if I'm just, eating a salad, or if I'm eating cake at the end of my, my dinner. I love it as a dessert as well. So I think we all have our own ways of doing it. And I don't want people to think that it's only, one way to do it. And that way sometimes can get, a little frustrating for you, or it can pull you away from wine. It's many different ways to enjoy it.
I think that's important. I think if you drink what you like and you eat what you like, you're going to be happy.
You're going to be happy. Exactly.
That's
regardless of whether it's textbook, who cares?
That's the first thing, the first few things I bring up is the ungoogleable and the subjectivity. The fact that wine is completely subjective. Dwayne, you like to drink at the beginning and the end. I like to drink at the beginning, middle, and end. That's me. When I'm having my bites of meat, I'm gonna have a glass, because that's how I've been brought up. And that's in the wine business. I know that's the I don't want to say proper way, but it's just how I've learned.
Right.
That's how I've grown to enjoy it. But that doesn't mean it's the right way.
Right.
And, you know, that's the great thing and why I love wine so much. I love talking about wine. I love these webinars, sitting with my friends, chatting. You know, we had a little Zoom conversation last week. Dwayne, you just hopped on just to say hello to my boys. We were just having a class. But that's what wine's about. Wine's about having fun, being with your friends, being with your family, creating these good times, these good memories. And that's why, you know, the subjectivity of it really gives that difference. You know, in basketball, either you can perfect your craft and get better. In wine, obviously, in the winemaking side, there's that. But on the drinking and tasting and enjoying, there's no threshold. You make your own threshold. You make your own, you know, line. So I appreciate everyone mentioning that. And I guess I want to, you know, as we begin to wrap up, I want to just talk about distribution of Dwade cellars. And Jamie, I'll hop over to you. If people want to get their hands on Dwade cellars in the States, what's the best way of doing it?
Well, first of all, if they want to get the hands on the wines in Toronto or Ontario,
I'll jump into that. You stay on.
and certainly I want to say this out loud. We really appreciate the support you've given us over the years in the early going here. So it means a lot to us. But in the States, you know, strange times right now. I think this is you know, I feel for all our friends in the restaurant space, all our friends on the retail side that had to close their shops. But, you know, we're really fortunate to have a good set of distributors that we were starting with. We got in Texas, Victory and Ryan Schwartz and Maverick in Illinois. And we were coming online with a few more before we kind of find ourselves in this current situation. But the best way right now is to sign up for our private mailing list at dwadesellers.com. And we're going to put together kind of some offerings to get wine to folks, direct shipment. So that's the best way right now.
That's great. And in terms of Ontario, helperinwine.com is always live. So feel free to check that out. There's a few things I want to mention as we close up. Firstly is you three, thank you so much for joining us. I understand we're all at home and there isn't so much on the calendar, whereas, you know, normal circumstances would be different, but nevertheless, we appreciate you guys, you know, everyone watching, I'm sure, let alone my family, we really appreciate you guys coming on. So it means a lot to us. So thank you guys. There's a few things. One is in terms of Helper and Wine, we're a distributor based in Ontario. We are direct to consumer. Obviously we import it via the LCBO, the government agency, and then we're able to deliver it right to you. So in terms of the Wade wines, we're grateful from Jamie and Dwayne. We are offering magnums of both the 2016 and 2017 cab. They're very limited. They're both on our helperinwine.com website. If you type in Wade, you'll see both magnums available. We're taking reservations now. There are limited spaces, and we will confirm on a first come, first served basis, which will be released and landed in Ontario approximately fall of this year, bearing any more setbacks. In addition, there's a big release of the 3x Wade Rosé, which is awesome across the LCBO. The 3x Wade Rosé is going to be retailing for $24.95, and we'll begin taking reservations very soon for that. We're hoping that things settle down, Dwayne, so we can get you, Jamie, and Nick back up. But you know, let's cross that bridge when we get there. So we're looking forward to that. The people that are asking about the Wade Cab and the 3x Wade blend, those will be available in our market probably later in the fall, closer to holiday season. So stay tuned for that. If you have a sales rep here, or if you'd like a sales rep, please be in contact with them. If you don't have one, sales@helperinwine.com is available at any time. Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, Saturday, April 4th, we have Jeremy Sess from Domaine Dujac and Domaine de Trienne, and we have Antonio Galloni joining us again. So, you know, I really hope everyone stays safe. I hope everyone, you know, practices the social distancing and everything else the governments are asking us to do, because I hope we get past this and we can all enjoy a glass of wine soon. I know I miss getting together with my friends. I miss getting together with you guys. So I hope we can do it sometime soon.
100%. And if I could say anything just at the end is, you know, I think Jamie said it earlier, and Antonio, all of us have said the same thing is, you know, what wine has done is it brings people together. And, you know, even my relationship with Adam and his family, you know, it's brought us together. It's brought me into a new community, a new space in Toronto as well. And, you know, so it's been so cool. So I just, you know, my message to everyone out there is, If you love wine, whatever wine you taste that you love, we all have these things right here. Take pictures of them, put them in your phone. Any information you can ask anybody about them, just keep them all close to you. Keep them in your phone. So whenever you go somewhere, you can always have knowledge of what you like and information to those things. So that's what I do. My phone is filled with the wine bottles that I love and information about them all. So, I just want to, I want more people to be a part of this community. I want it to be younger and cooler, and we hope that the Wade brand could be a part of that. So, thank everybody.
Thanks, Dwayne. Antonio, any last remarks?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have an app called Delectable, which is perfect for photos and keeping track of the wines that you love.
Dwayne, let's
go. I would encourage
everybody
everybody to download Delectable.
I need that. Send me the correct spelling later.
I will send it to you. Delectable. It's awesome. It has the best image recognition for all the labels. You can keep track of your wines for later. We link with Banquet, which is our e-commerce app, which allows people to buy wines. And the whole idea here is to bring people into the conversation, make it easy for people to remember the wines that they've tasted and find them. So Delectable has the best image recognition software of any app out there, and it's free and it's killer. So and you can download all of your wines at once because it's got a multiple photo download feature. So you could take 100 wines and upload them in 1 second and then write your comments. So it's super cool. Yeah, I'll definitely connect.
Well, I definitely have that on my phone. I'm a religious user. And Jamie, any last remarks from you?
No, I just echo what Antonio and you and Dwayne said. Wine's about bringing people together, and I appreciate this. I mean, look at what we're doing right here. If you asked me 5 years ago if I was going to be on a conference call with Dwayne and Antonio, I would have said, I'll bet any amount of money that's not taking place. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks again for all your support.
Yeah, and the last remark, once again, looking for Dwade Cellars, visit dwadecellars.com or helpernwine.com if you're in Canada. Delectable Antonio Galloni, please take a look at that if you want to keep track of what you're drinking. As Dwayne said, it's a great app and a great source to do that. Last but not least, Venice Media. If you want to subscribe, as I said, we're religious users of it. Use the code WADE today for 30% off the subscriber fee. Once again, thank you guys for coming. Please be safe. And we hope that you could join us Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern for Dujak and Antonio Galloni. Thank you guys. Thanks all of you for
coming. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
You guys, man. Appreciate it.
Cheers.